I'm not going back in there.
I have a friend in there alone, and I don't want to leave her in there alone.
I'm not standing here shaking for nothing.
How about you?
Oh, it's very, very real.
I don't like it. I want to go home.
I ain't never took my coat and hood it over my face like that.
I thought it was very powerful. Just turned my mind.
Terrible. But I just found it really horrible. I just had to come out. I couldn't take it anymore.
People are extremely depressed by this.
Did it upset you?
Yeah.
I've never in my life known a movie where people would faint. I mean, it's hard to make people faint.
I believe. I believe.
Remember that blast from the past? When that first came out, the great impact that it seemed to have on the social psyche on that. We're following the Alpha Course one way or the other. Ron and I are kind of doing it in loose fashion this time. And they covered this Sunday how to resist evil. And as I was looking, even though I was tried to be a week ahead, but was following them in this was a question I wanted to have us address in here. And as I got contemplating this, there was a few things that Nicky Gumbel said, a few things as I looked up that eventually brought me to this little clip we watched. I had come across an article called The 10 Best Movie Depictions of the Devil. 10 Best Movie Depictions of the Devil. And one paragraph reads like this: "There is a long serpentine line of movies which demonically play on our obsession with mankind's oldest enemy. And it's not hard to fathom why. Since the release of The Exorcist in 1973, which scared us in a way we've never been scared before, movies which deal with the devil court a fascination with us which is without equal." Now, I guess how we seem to have this fascination a bit is a little bit understandable. We have a fallen nature by our inherent coming into this world. But what strikes me is how much we seriously take the world in general, takes evil and not so much holiness. And now, even with a level of respect, people are overwhelmed by evil. They're very quick to believe in evil quickly. As a matter of fact, they don't seem to have a problem with it that even some people who have come to the Lord started from the position they had no trouble seeing evil. They had no trouble believing there was evil, even to the point of a demonic force like Satan. And it led them to eventually, by process of association, that there must be a God on the other side. And it does make sense that we would, because, well, you know what? We know that we already looked at this. To find God, we have to seek Him with all our heart, with all our minds, with all our soul. But evil seeks you. Evil grows very quickly within us. And it doesn't have to be the movie version either. When we look at the world around us, we've lived in now a time of the horrors of things like ISIS and Boko Haram and some of these things. We've watched what drugs have done in our culture and how it has destroyed people. And so we have no trouble seeing evil. As a matter of fact, the point is you can't avoid it. Just because you and I are Christians, and I'm making this assumption, just because you and I may have a relationship with God doesn't mean we get to avoid evil. It is out there. It is something we have to deal with. But let's start with who we are. Who are the people that are in a living relationship with God? 1 Peter 2:9. Peter wanted us to understand, if you sit here this morning and you are in a relationship with God, he says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his light. You see, the world has a way it has to deal with evil because they really don't have too much in the line of defenses. How you and I deal with evil is entirely different. How the person who is a member of this royal priesthood, who is of the holy nation, the chosen people, who are called from darkness into light, we are called to have a whole different approach to evil. So it's not just a case of resisting evil, it's how do we deal with evil. The question's even bigger than that. If we looked at all of Scripture, we would find, and put it into a nutshell, you could make the statement and be scripturally correct. And the statement would be, flee evil, but stand your ground. Resist evil, but don't resist evil. Put on whole armor, but don't put on armor that's your armor. You know, it's very contradictory, isn't it? So how do we know what to do? The only people in the early service who knew was me and Debbie Arney. Because you know who helped us out? Kenny Rogers. Yeah, so there we go. Yeah, because it was music related. And Kenny Rogers had a song, and I'll have to ask Debbie to resist. She went into the entire song as we brought it up. Is a chorus in a song called The Gambler. Do you remember the song The Gambler? Remember those words? I bet you we could all be in here singing it just like a hymn, right? You got to know when to hold them, when to fold them, when to walk away and when to run. Well, he gets into a whole bunch of other things in the song that are, not necessarily involving us. But right there, that part of the chorus in that song deals very much with us. The whole thing with evil is you got to know when. And then we go from there. Know when what? Well, we have four things, kind of like Kenny Rogers in his chorus there. And here are the four things you got to know when. We'll start at the end of the chorus, really. You got to know when to run. You got to know when to run. Number one, run. 2 Timothy 2:22. If you're looking at your guide sheets, you see you have an interesting phrase underlined in there, an operative phrase. Here is the Apostle Paul. He's writing to young Timothy. He's just starting in his ministry career, his leadership, if you will. And he says this, flee the desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call the Lord out of a pure heart. You got to know when to run. Flee, if we went back into the Greek, that's exactly what it would mean. It means to run away from. That's exactly what it means, but run away from what? Well, in this case, here is Paul, and I have to point this out because you need the context, talking to a young person, and he says, flee the evil passions of youth. So we step back, well, here's the first clue on where this fits. What are the evil passions of youth? Well, everybody, especially as we're older, we go to the first thing, well, yeah, it's those raging hormones. That's where it all starts. But I was reading in a Tyndale commentary, and it brought out a number of things that were interesting that maybe we don't get struck with as obvious as this. Here is this young fellow, Timothy. Keep this in mind in the context. Timothy's pretty disciplined. He's been brought up right. I think he already had that side of life kind of under control. So Paul is writing to some other things, and in this commentary, it brings up other things that maybe we forget that these are really even more profound, can be an evil in youth. And the commentary brought up things like impatience. You know, when you're young, it's never fast enough. Are we there yet? You know, and then as you go on in life, I'm not advancing fast enough. Changes aren't coming fast enough. So you can run into a lot of problems in your youth with impatience. You can run into problems with love of dispute. I don't know why, but when we're younger, we love to argue. I brought up the point, you know, people in college, and somebody else say, oh, just talk to a 13-year-old. You don't need to wait to college. love to argue, love to dispute things, and that can be something that can get them into a lot of trouble. It can become an evil. Novelties. We love novelties when we're young. Hey, that's new, that's flashy, that's something I haven't tried before, let's do that. Ambition. Oh, we're all about ambition usually when we're young. We're going to get out there and conquer the world and rule it. And I got thinking, I was telling you, I shared a little bit that we've been working in partnerships with universities in the idea of how these residencies, I'll get into at another time. But we were up on, and Rick got to go with me on the final day of this up at the Wesleyan University up there in Marion. And they have a big thing called the church fair. And I'm sure it's changed over the years. And basically now what it is programs for the grads to transition into these big resident type, more training actually in big churches usually that's going on. And a lot of them are very flashy, very young, very hip type things going on. And you could see it was kind of fun to watch as you sat there and everybody, they had their little booths and tables where kids would congregate and spend most of their time. And on the end, there was a big Q&A, and it was interesting to hear what generally the young folks in representing these programs said to the other young folks. It was all, there was a novelty aspect to it going on there. We tend to like that kind of thing, but it can get you in trouble. It can get a young person in trouble if you follow your fallen nature into this respect of what's going on. But I think what we find Paul then saying can be broader than that. See, it's not fleeing necessarily youthful passions, it's fleeing the wrong you. Every one of us have flaws that are built into us. Now, as we get older, we may not have the love of dispute. We might actually be the other. We might be to the point where we're all argued out, and we will avoid an argument even to the point of compromising something we shouldn't compromise. Or in our case, we don't love novelty anymore. We're more like, let's do it like we used to do it. Let's go back and stay in what we know. So we can have things that are totally different, but they are still flaws within ourselves that if they take charge, we're going to go somewhere we don't want to go. We're told to flee, and in fact, think of it as the wrong you. It's the fallen nature, it's the wrong you. Well, there is a right you too. There is the designed you. God says He has plans for you and I. Plans not to harm, but to help us, to heal us. So there is a right you. There is a designed you. So what Paul is really saying is this: you want to know when to run, you want to know when to flee, flee the wrong you. Flee the wrong you and run to the right you, the one that God is designing. So that is when we are told to run. When do you run? You run from the wrong self. That's when you run. Then we run into, or go into the second one because, okay, this one said to run away. The next one says, don't run away. It says, stand your ground. Stand your ground. James 4:7 says, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and He will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Resist the devil. Resist in the Greek term there really means to stand your ground. Dig in your heels and stand your ground. Isn't it interesting? You flee yourself, but you come to the devil and you stand your ground. And you remember another verse that's kind of interesting from 1 Peter 5:8. The devil is like what? There we go. The devil is like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Wow. Now, that's interesting. I'm supposed to run away from the wrong self, but when it comes to a lion, I'm supposed to stand my ground. And I'm going to let Ron scare us with a picture, will you? How's that? How would you like to be that photographer? Stand my ground against this. That seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? And so I couldn't resist, had to look up, because you can Google anything, and so I Googled, How to Survive a Lion Attack. And I wish I would have read that before Steve and I went to Kenya, because believe me, it would have come in handy. That's another story for another time. But anyway, here it is, the official How to Avoid a Lion Attack. And it's a kind of a 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1, don't panic. Okay, you get that one, you're really doing well. So it goes on to say, if you're being charged by a lion, do everything you can not to panic. Stay calm, and thinking straight can help save your life. Knowing what to expect can help you stay calm. For example, know that the lion is going to growl while they charge. This can shake the ground beneath you, but know this is normal in a lion attack. First thing in standing your ground, not to panic. Not panicking, keeping your head straight can save your life. Wow, when Satan is attacking as the lion who roars, isn't that even what Paul's saying? He's a lion who roars. Why does he roar? He roars to make you scared. And the number one thing is, don't be scared. Keep your head straight, and then you might survive. Makes sense with real lions, makes sense with Satan. Then we go to number 2. Don't run, stand your ground. Don't run, stand your ground. Chances are you're not going to outrun this. I bet you he's faster than you are. You need to take charge of the situation. Wow, okay. And show the lion you're a threat. Turn so that you're side on side with the lion while clapping your hands, shouting, waving your arms, things that make you appear bigger and threatening to the lion. Then 3, retreat slowly. Do not turn your back. Keep flailing your arms and showing, but slowly step away sideways. And if you run, the lion will sense your fear and chase you. Remain threatening to the lion even while you're retreating. The 4th is this one has some real aspects in the spiritual side. Remain standing. Do you remember when Paul talks about putting on the armor of God? He says to wear that armor and to stand, and then to remain standing. The idea is not just to protect against an attack, is that you just don't fall down. And this is pretty interesting with the lion. If these precautions don't work for any reason, the things we've already talked, and the lion may charge, if this happens, remain standing. The lion will likely go for your face and throat. Wow, that does not sound like the way Satan works. You know, when Satan's coming after you, first thing, he'll blindside you. He'll go for where you're not looking. He'll go for the face. He'll take out your eyes so you don't see him. And he'll go for the throat. You know, he doesn't fool around. He'll go for the throat. He's not going to poke you. He's going in for the kill. Know that these things is once again, you expect him, right? But as the lion is jumping, it says, when they jump, you will have a full view of the giant cat. Yeah, so not only do you see this big head, you see the entire body coming at you. Well, if you weren't panicking before, right? But it says this isn't a bad thing. Even though it's terrifying, it will help you to get a good view of the animal. If you were to crouch, you would have much less of a chance to fight back if it attacked you at that angle. Remain standing. Be prepared for what's coming. The fangs of Satan are always the same. You've got deception and you've got destruction, and the two of them are coming at you in some form, and they're going to go for your throat, and they're going to go to blindside you. But if you can remain standing, you stand a chance in the attack. If you can look bigger than you are, then you stand a chance in the attack to remain bigger. Now, we can understand in the physical sense anything I can do to make myself look physically bigger, but in the spiritual sense, because we're talking about a lion far scarier than the one we were looking at, how does one appear? How does one become larger than oneself? Well, for someone who is of the chosen people, for someone who is of the royal priesthood, of what we've read about, it's not you at all, is it? The whole idea of a Christian, of a spiritual life, is God lives within you. You and I, we're not all that big, but we are filled with an infinite God. It changes everything. It changes everything. In the attack, it's no wonder the world can feel so worried about things like the devil and exorcist, yeah. But we are in a whole different situation. We remain standing. We don't give in to fear. We stand our ground. Interesting, isn't it? Counterintuitive so far. One is run away from the wrong self. Well, that doesn't seem so scary. Oh, it is. Run away from the wrong self in you. However, when it comes to the external attack, stand your ground. Stand your ground. Then the third one, even though that says resist, then the third one says don't resist. Well, then when do we not resist? This is a toughie. This is very hard for any Christian or anyone else. It's impossible, really. Jesus is talking. Matthew 5:38. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So once, get the context as we're going on here. We're talking about that idea of getting your own justice, of standing up for yourself, of giving retribution, if you will. But I tell you, do not resist the evil person. Resist Satan, but do not resist the evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand him your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from one who wants to borrow from you. That's some pretty tough stuff. If we don't take it in context, it almost sounds like, well, then be a doormat. Well, no, that's not what's being said here. What's being said is there is a time to resist and a time not to resist. And by the way, the word is the same word that as resist the devil. It's still that same word, to stand your ground. So stand your ground against Satan, but don't stand your ground against an evil person. What's going on there? Why would that be? Well, there's a couple of things. One is, in this fact, is that somewhere in Scripture we read this, that vengeance is not yours. Vengeance is the Lord's. Every now and then we sing the song, the battle belongs to the Lord. And that's borrowed from Scripture as well. Either God is your shield and God is the judge of all, or He's not. And as it was well pointed out, another reason to think about why we don't resist the evil as a way of life of the person was because then you become a score counter. And that's the opposite of Christianity. We're called to forgive, and God forgives us as we forgive others. So that's counter to God's will. Another thing is remembering that the real enemy, we've already covered, the real enemy isn't that person that's giving you a hard time. The real enemy we've already looked at. The real enemy is Satan. The real enemy is what's going on in this cosmic battle underneath everything that we consider reality. Unfortunately, we lose that focus even in churches. How many churches you end up in a thing is, my enemy in here is that this person or that person, well, they're not doing what I think God wants us to do, so my enemy is that person. Or my enemy is some other person. It's really comes down to not a person. We're all under the effect of something. Sometimes even in here, sometimes we're manipulated by Satan or dark forces, and sometimes we're letting ourselves to be controlled by God. In those things, one way or the other, that's what's going on. Second thing that we pointed out was a context here too, that it was this idea dealt with retaliation. I don't have right to retaliate. Really for a couple of reasons. One is because I'm already dead myself. Remember that I'm alive in Christ and dead to self. So if I'm just worried about little old me, then I'm worried about something that I shouldn't be worried about in the first place. And where I'm placing my confidence. We say that stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself. And there is good advice in that you and I should have the backbone, and we should have the confidence or integrity in ourselves to be able to stand up and be able to do that. What is said in Scripture is that even though you have the backbone, that you don't, because you have now deliberately and intentionally put your confidence somewhere else. And that's in God Himself. Either our confidence is in God or it's not. It's in God or it's not. Share a little personal story that way. That this is one way this came out to me anyway. This is one working application. There was a time in previous work when there was a promotion that was available. I was eligible for the promotion. And so they tested me, if you would say. There was a kind of an audition, a test, whatever, to perform, to take this upgrade in position. And it was sprung on me. It was done in very dubious situation. It wasn't really a fair thing, the way it went down. And I had all the right in the world and all the confidence in the world to go in and to state my case on this and have this done. But this conviction, this very thing came to me and said, well, felt God really telling me, says, well, who's your rock and shield? Who really is? Who do you really depend on? Are you looking out for yourself, or am I looking out for you? Am I the ultimate judge, or are you the ultimate judge? And I was very convicted on this, and so I didn't say a thing. I just kept doing my job. I just kept going on, didn't say a word. A few weeks later, the boss kind of comes back and he says, you know that way we tested you for such and such? I said, that really wasn't too fair. Oh, really? Okay. And so they redid. And I got to try again in this in much better terms on that. Now, just to avoid a fairy tale thing, it's not like trust God and you'll get it whatever you want, is actually it worked out that I didn't get the promotion anyway. However, what that did was set into motion why I'm here. Well, I'm in ministry. If I would have gotten that promotion, it would have been very, very hard to leave that and come. It would have been even harder than it was. So sometimes it's not like, okay, you'll get what you want. What happens, though, is that you get to go where God is leading you, or you're not held back. And that's where it really comes down to, because the one thing I can guarantee you, no matter where God is taking you in life, where He will take you, and you have to, and as you're resisting evil and you're doing whatever you have to do and you're obeying God, because if you notice in each of these things, if you ran from that, you run to this. You ran from the wrong you ran towards the plan God had for you. Even as you resisted Satan, you were standing on the rock. You were standing on the firm ground. So there's always two sides of this going on. So in the case of this, where God is protecting and He leads, the one thing that everybody needs to go where you're going, no matter what details are in there, is this obedience. If there's no obedience, nothing else matters. You've got to follow where you're being led. So that ties in with that number 3 thing of when you don't resist, because it is tough. Who doesn't want to speak up for themselves? But sometimes we're called not to, for very particular reasons. Number 4 dovetails in it all, in everything we've already talked about. Number 4 is remain open to being armored. Armor up. Put on the armor. Interesting, if we look at Ephesians chapter 6, classic verse on putting on the armor of God, and it's been pointed out several times, if you look at putting on the armor of God, there is nothing for your back. And if you think back to the lion, the one thing it said in the charge of a lion, never turn your back. Whatever you do, don't turn and run. Never turn your back to the enemy. So we have the armor for the front. You know probably these verses, and boy, this is be a whole series in itself. But let me read just a little bit of what Paul told the Ephesians. Ephesians 6:10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. That's what we've been talking about all along, how you're going to be larger than yourself. What you do to really deal with evil, you have a power mightier than yourself. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. That's where the real war is. Now, we could go into all the parts of the armor and all of that going on. But rather than that, just staying on task, I just want to take one little phrase on your sheets. You probably noticed it's underlined, put on the full armor of God. The nuance in the original language was to put on armor like the armor God wears. Not just put on armor like the armor that God wears. In effect, though, when you look at God, what's God's armor? He doesn't strap anything on. God is his own armor. So in effect, if you are armoring up for this battle, you are putting on God. Every attribute you think of God, you're putting on God himself. Here's where the church maybe runs into another problem. And this fits well considering for those of us who were out there during Trunk or Treat, there's something we noticed, man. There was a lot of kids dressed like ninjas and this and that and the other thing and soldiers and all of this, but they really weren't ninjas and they really weren't soldiers. Consider the great toys, the great things you can get on a kid today. There's a kid, man, that is one killer Halo outfit he's got there. Look at that little guy. He's got a gun that looks pretty serious, doesn't it? This monster weapon he's holding. He's got on all this armor all over himself, a helmet down there. And then you've got the guys over on the right. Well, let me just ask you, and feel free to say however it strikes you, what's the difference between the little guy on the left with a very serious looking outfit on and the guys on the right? The real thing kind of sums it up, doesn't it? And then that gets into all kinds of implications. You can start with this. If there's a battle going on, I'll tell you what, that little guy probably can play battles like anybody's business. But if the real thing is going on, it's the guys on the right who have the training. It's those guys who have the discipline, those guys who have the strategies that know how to take it on. The other thing that's going on in a real battle, like that outfit looks really sharp on the young fellow, but what's it made of? He's got little thin plastic, lightweight things that just look like armor. He doesn't really have any body armor on at all. It just looks like it's toys. It's just thin plastic. If he were to be hit by a bullet in that stuff, it would simply rip right through it. There would be no question. And that gun that he has, it looks serious, but maybe it runs on batteries. Maybe it makes a sound. I don't know. But one thing you can be sure, it doesn't shoot real bullets. It's not a real weapon. It's just a toy to look like a real weapon, as opposed to the real weapons on the right side. Kind of fits in with the church, because you know what? Sometimes we get into these religious environments and people are really good at playing games. And boy, can they play war. Can they play the spiritual war? They've got on the armor, but it's all plastic. They know the language, but it's just buzzwords. And you know, it sounds like they know Scripture. They know the sword of the Spirit, but it's really just a toy. They really don't have it down. They haven't spent any time in it. They haven't reflected in it. It's not really part of them. And the training, well, I'm afraid 30 minutes on a Sunday gets us started, but it's not really the thing that gets the job done. It's playing the war. It's playing the game. It's not the real thing. But we're in a real battle. And there is real evil to be resisted. And it's not a game. And so we have to have the real armor. We wear God himself. That's the only armor. And if you're not wearing God, then you're wearing plastic armor. We need the real armor. There it is, the whole idea of how do you not just resist, because resisting evil doesn't really fit the whole question. How do you deal with evil? Because it's all around you. It's not going away until the end time, and God says it's going away. You'll have to deal with it. I'll have to deal with it. And you know, we can fall back. If it helps you, you can just remember good old Kenny Rogers and see, you know, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, and when to walk away and when to run. Or you can think in terms of Scripture in this way. You've got to know to run from the wrong self. There's more in you to watch out for than probably anything going on around you. You got to know when to resist. And that resistance doesn't come from other people. It comes from Satan himself. When you realize you are being attacked, and that in itself takes discernment. You got to know how and when to stand your spiritual ground. You got to know when not to resist. And you've got to learn how to armor up. You've got to learn how to armor up. As you're sitting there, are you one of those people that's got a whole load of plastic armor? Or are you wearing the real thing? Bottom line, just closing with real simple questions. Do you know how? And do you know when? And do you? And do you?